Hey everybody, welcome to our Real Talk on Real Estate. You guys want to learn how I financed my first commercial build, first commercial assets? Look, every week I come in and I want to teach you guys knowledge, something that I've done in the past that'll help you guys move the needle today. Stuff that we still execute today that we did in the past, we learned from, went through ups, downs, trials and errors, and trials and tribulations, and help you guys reduce the brain damage that business and life will bring to you if you're naive, ignorant, and unknowledgeable. Right. One of the biggest things that I know is that 95% of people are already fearful and scared. So why not take that fear and at least mitigate it so that you guys can be successful at your deals, right? And so if I've learned a couple things over the last 26 years that I've been in the real estate game, in 30 years since last 30, almost 31 years, God, that makes me feel old, that I've been in the entrepreneur space. Didn't even know what the word entrepreneur meant for the first decade that I was an entrepreneur. That's how gullible I was. But here's how it went, guys. So I started, you have to palette things and execute them in small pieces in order to comprehend that you can get to the next level. I think the biggest problem today is that people look at what's on social media, like you'll see what's on Instagram, and people are driving around Lamborghinis, yachts, Rolls Royces, wearing big fat Rolexes and stuff, and I'll even do it. But it's like, damn, guys, I've been at it for 30 years. It doesn't happen overnight. Success truly takes a lifetime to build and develop. I remember being in the airport in Houston, Texas, flying back, and I remember being on a layover, and I was sitting first class on, I think it was Continental Airlines at the time, and there was this man, he had a big fat ring, and he had a presidential Rolex on, and I watched him. I just knew because he's wearing a watch that he was self-employed. So I happened to sit right on the side of him. Like there was two seats in first class and two seats in first class. I sat on the seat right between the two aisles with him. And I turned to him. We finally got on the plane and boarded. And I said, this guy has to be sitting first class because he's wearing a presidential Rolex. I turned to him and I said, I said, what do you own? And he chuckled. He goes, why do you think I own something? And I said, because someone like yourself that's wearing at the time, the presidential Rolex, I paid 70 grand for it. At that time, day and age was about $35,000. And you're not walking around with a $35,000 watch if you don't own something. And so so we got to talking, and he goes, my 20s sucked. My 30s were tough, but better. My 40s were good, but my 50s have been great. And point being is that it takes a lifetime to build wealth, but some people just think that it happens overnight. So let's start from the beginning here real quick, and I'm gonna do it in a couple simple steps, and let's do this over the next 10 minutes here and explain to you guys how I financed my first commercial build, ground up, right? It didn't happen from just like, hey, let's build a build. Let's just do a commercial build and do a retail center, because my first commercial retail center was only about 6,000 square feet, just shy thereof, and it sat on a half-acre lot. But it was a massive build to me. And that one little build, I learned more on that than I have thus far in a compressed amount of time over the course of the last 25 years. So I was buying old distressed retail. And here's how I palleted new construction, because I had to comprehend what I was doing prior, right? And I was buying these old assets that no bank would lend money on because they were completely empty and they weren't worth pot shit to anybody, not even the bank. So if they weren't worth anything to the bank, how do you buy them? Well, you buy them through owner financing, where the owner actually finances the asset for you because they own it. And typically these distressed assets, they don't owe money on them typically. And I did this every single year for 15 years while I was running my construction company in early years, and we weren't busy enough in the winters to keep our guys busy. We would just go buy a building. And so in 1999, I started looking at acquiring a retail center. In 2000, I bought this little retail center that was about 8,000 square feet, and it had the capabilities of being 5 units, okay? And I just gutted the inside. The bones were good, meaning the block walls around the outside. The roof was in decent shape. I went and had it patched up and sealed up. I replaced the entire front pocket roof and put a brand new store facade on the front. The aluminum storefront glass and doors, ripped off all the old crap, and then I restuccoed the entire building, made it look sleek and new. And I put a brand new steel metal roof, making it look ranch style, because that's kind of fit the motif of the village it was called the Village of Los Ranchos, where I actually built this out. I renovated this first building. And then 6 months later, I leased it, and I was successful leasing it, and I used one unit for my office, and stored my construction equipment behind the building because I had a little bit of extra land. Barely enough to store all my equipment, but perfect for about the first 8 years that I was in business. And then I leased it. But 6 months later, I said, damn, that was such a home run. I'm going to do another one. And so I bought another old distressed building, really similar, just down the road. And I did the exact same thing. And again, the second one was slightly harder than the first one because it wasn't as desirable of a location, but still very, very successful building. The rents were a little bit lower, but I bought them for so inexpensive because nobody wanted them, knew what to do with them, but they were on a busy highway that it was very successful. So by the time I did my second one, I started thinking, okay, I'm going to try a third one, but I want to start building these. So I went and I looked for a piece of land. And at the time, I didn't know what I needed as far as size, but I found this half-acre lot on a really desirable road. It was a state highway, and it was high traffic count, extremely high traffic count. And I actually landed up owner financing the entire acre that was there. But I did it in pieces because it was actually two lots. There was a half-acre lot and a half-acre lot. And at the time, I needed to preserve money to continue building the houses that I was building, and I needed to preserve money to be able to get this build that I wanted to do out of the ground. But I wasn't sure about the brand new construction, so I palleted it off in two phases, where I did a half acre, 5,800 square feet, and a second acre, 5,800 square feet, in two different phases on a full 1 acre lot. And so the first build took me about $800,000 to build, including the land, all the permit fees, entitlement fees, everything. And you got to remember, this is like 2002. So entitlements and stuff were a lot less expensive at that time. And so when I went in and I bought the land, what I did is I knew this deal of owner financing that I've been buying my buildings with. Why can't it work for land, right? Like no one pulled me by the hand and said, hey, Jerome, why don't you do this owner financing, creative finance deal? Like I didn't have YouTube in 2002 to Google, what's owner financing? How do I learn this stuff? No, I had to figure this stuff out on my own. And so I did this owner finance contract on the land. And the way I did it is the gentleman who owned it was actually a politician, and he owned a bunch of land all over the place. He had dumped a bunch of crap on the land. I didn't know anything about environmental phase ones. I didn't know anything about any of that stuff. So I buy this land, had tons of dumped asphalt and concrete, like 3 or 4 feet deep on it. So I get into this build, right? And I landed up having to spend like $40,000 unaccounted, unexpensed, budgeted money into this land to clean it up and mitigate it before I got started, because they had been dumping concrete and asphalt on it for years and it looked like just dirt on the ground. But the second we got into digging footings, there was a massive amount of asphalt and broken crushed concrete in it. It really sucked because I wasn't planning for that. But here's what saved me, was that I hadn't paid for the land yet. In fact, I had just put down a modest like $10,000 on the land, and I had tied up the land in a fashion where I went in, I took it down with owner financing. I did a 3-year call on the land, and I didn't even need 3 years. That time frame, I actually had executed with what's called a delayed closing and an estimated time of due diligence, which at that time, I was real bold, had nothing to lose, everything to gain. The land was for sale, but wasn't for sale. It was one of those lots where it had been for sale forever, and the guy didn't care if it took a little while to collect his money. In fact, he just wanted to know that he had a viable owner that wanted to buy the land and he was going to get out of it, and actually loved having the payments. So I went in and I bought it through owner financing. So I had very little money out of pocket on this commercial land, and I was able to go in and utilize and conserve my money to go in and actually entitle the land. And so this was one of my first learning experiences on what land entitlement could do for a developer and a builder when you add value through land entitlements. Now, the land was already zoned commercial, okay? And so I didn't have to rezone it or any of that stuff, but I did have to go in and get permits, building permits, and I kept it super simple. I didn't get into the repositioning of entitling land and changing zoning and short platting and any of that stuff. I just kept it really simple, and you should too if it's one of your first builds. Don't complicate it. Keep it real simple and find something that fits the motif of what you're looking for. And it was just a half-acre lot, guys. So people will come to me and say, Jerome, what's like the perfect sized lot? Whatever you can mentally palette, I spent way too much time, didn't make nearly enough money on the first build, and made way more money on my value add stuff that I was doing in the distressed real estate market. But man, it was worth its weight in gold for doing that project, because what I did to my brain by doing this was I gave myself the self-confidence to grow and scale. And what I learned about development on that project, hands down, was tenfold what has parlayed me to what I do today. That first little project. And if that does that for each and every single one of you guys that's watching this video, it's worth its weight in gold, because it'll take you places in life that no school, no college, no education, nothing else in life will ever take you, because you'll walk through this build step by step. And what's cool about it is most people, I know, they think that like you snap your finger and like you got to know all this stuff, and if you don't, you're going to lose the build. That's not the way it works. These go so slow in regards to like the entitlement process, the permitting, the construction, that it's slow enough for you to learn step by step what you need to do over the course of time, that it's not scary as you move through it, as long as your brain is open and you're willing to learn. That's the biggest thing. Okay, now, where did the money come from? So the money came from the entitlements. It came from the designs. It came from the prints. Okay, and I didn't know this at the time. I didn't even know what was involved. In fact, these are the entitlements to a project. Okay, these are the permitting prints that make it viable to get money to a bank. This is what a bank wants to see. And the reason that a bank wants to see this is because once a bank has this with all the architecture, the engineering, all of the surveys, all of the trust engineering, the seismics, everything, the land, the lay of the land, they can appraise it. They can send this to an appraiser, and the appraiser can say, this is what this asset is going to be worth once stabilized. And then they assess it based on pro formas as to what is happening in the area and can it be leased? Is it viable to lease this asset, right? And so I went in and I put that together. And here's what I did, guys. And I'll tell you, so if you're scared on your first deal, don't be so scared, because I promise you'll get through it. So I think, okay, I've been building houses for the last 3 years. How much harder can this be? I need an architect. I need an electrical engineer. I need a mechanical and plumbing engineer. I need a civil engineer. I need the truss engineering, which we do on residential as well. And I should be good to go. And then I need to go get my permits, and I need to deal with the municipality, like the fire marshal's office. I need to deal with public works. I need to deal with parks and recreation. And then it came to my attention that I had to deal with the State Department of Transportation, because I was on a state highway. And I said, okay, no problem, I'll deal with them. So I go in, I start talking to them. They said, where's your traffic engineering? I said, traffic engineering? What's that? And they said, well, you need the engineering to tell you how much traffic there is and how much impact your retail center is going to have on the roadway, and see where they're going to come in from and how much disruption it's going to have on the slowdown of traffic and the egress and ingress of traffic to your facility. And I'm like, oh my God, I got this like little tiny retail center. I'm not going to make that big of an impact, am I? And so it was going to cost me another $10,000 that I didn't have budgeted at the time to get this done, to get to permits. And I was stressing out because I was already overextended. So some of you guys that are sitting back feeling overextended or worried about the capital, I was that guy. And so I sat back and I went to the state engineering office. I sat there, and this one gentleman named Dustin, he sat with me and he goes, Jerome, I'll help you. He said, you can do the engineering yourself. We have all the stats and research and books. And so I literally did my own traffic engineering, and I sat there like a college student. I'll never forget it. I remember him walking in and looked at the door, and I was in one of their conference room, and he go, Jerome, you okay? You need anything? Can I help you with anything? And I'm like, no. And the real answer was yes. But I was so freaking confused. I was like, no, because I didn't even know what the hell questions to ask. He gives me this book. I'm looking through it, and I'm like, holy shit, what did I get myself into? I'm going to save $10,000. Okay, I'm going to save $10,000. And I'm sitting there doing traffic engineering studies, and I write all this bullshit down that I don't even know what's what. I complicate the hell out of it. I take it back to him, and I go, okay, I think this is the information that you told me I need. And he looks at it, and he said, Jerome, we don't need all that. Here, let me show you this. He sat me down, opened up the book, went through all the stats on the highway where I was at. He goes, write this down, write this down. Okay, now put this narrative together, and I want you to consolidate this into one draft and then bring it back to me. And it was almost like I was in English class. And so I wrote all this stuff out. Hence, this is what got me money, guys. And so when I went down and I did this, it saved me the $10,000 in traffic engineering. I don't recommend you guys do this. I recommend that you hire a traffic engineer. But at the time, I was super young. I don't even think I was 30 yet. I think I was still in my late 20s. And I sat down And I'm going, okay, I got this. And so I get the traffic engineering, and then boom, when I did that, I was able to go in for permits. Now, here was the change. Now, I went to a local bank, okay? And it was a local bank that dealt with small business owners, and they liked promoting and investing in small business owners that were local, and they love these little projects. And one of the big things is that if you kept your loan under $1 million, it didn't even have to go through like a corporate underwriting. They were able to do what's called a roundtable underwriting. And a lot of banks still do this today, where if you're new, you're small, you have a little project, they like promoting growth of small business owners. So I went down, and you have to talk to the right bank. Now, not every bank does this, but a lot of the trust banks in town, a lot of the locally owned banks that are small community banks, these are the guys that do it. That bank happened to be called People's Bank, and it was just a small little bank that was owned out of Southern Colorado, and they only did business in Southern Colorado and all of Central New Mexico. And so I went to them, and I sat down with the underwriting team, and I learned a lot that day. When I sat down with the underwriting team, those of you guys that are scared to get money, I sat down, I thought these guys were like against me, like they were trying not to lend me money. And then I learned that if you follow their parameters, they're investing their money to protect their money. And if you do in alignment with what the banks are doing, you will also protect yourself, your investors, and your long-term financial gains. So I landed up realizing at that early of my early stages of my development career that they were protecting their financial interest. And I sat down, talked to this guy named Sam. Sam Johnson was his name. And I remember Sam sat down with me, and he was just a good guy. And I hated the fact that he got out of banking in the 2008 recession, went and worked for his father-in-law who owned a chemical company, but it was just the right thing for him to do because his father-in-law was very successful. But I hated losing Sam in the financial world because he helped me and advocated for me in my early years, and they'll advocate for you too. But one of the biggest things is most people get embarrassed to go in and talk to these people and tell them the truth. Sam knew I was wet behind the ears. He knew I was building single family residential homes. He also knew that I was doing small little value add retail centers, but the one thing that he knew was this was my first ground up retail build. But it was within arm's reach, right? It was only a 5,800 square foot building. It wasn't anything massive. It was something that was probably double the size of one home. I figured it's like building two houses in one structure. What can be the big deal, right? We can get this done. It's like building two houses together, and I was already doing like 8 houses a year at that time, so no big deal. And that's the way my brain comprehended it. And I did the retail centers that were bigger than this, but they were just renovations. And so I didn't realize all the entitlement stuff that went along with it. So Sam sat down with me. He kind of educated me on the banking world in the commercial sector. And when I got the plans, I went in, we reevaluated the land, and I went to the table having an extra $100,000 in my bank account, thinking I was going to need it for my down payment. And little to my knowledge, I didn't realize that the entitlements and the permits that I brought to the project actually made the land value go up substantially, exponentially, more than double the value of what I paid for the land. So we collateralized the land itself against the build and the construction loan. I had to come to the table at that day and age with zero money out of pocket on the down payment because I had created the value in the land itself. So my the first draw that I took was to pay off the land. And so I had to put in a little bit of interest reserve money, and we went to work. And I used the bank's money to go ahead and facilitate the build. Now, at that time, my credit was barely getting repaired. I think now I had about a 650 credit score, still was a little subpar. Sat down with Sam, and I remember Sam asking me what happened. He saw my history over the last 3 years that I was rebuilding. I was buying trucks, buying houses, building houses. My net worth had protected myself to be able, against the build, I had to collateralize and sign a personal guarantee, which I signed my life away to do this little building. But when I did that, guys, it opened doors for me and opportunities. And I'll tell you, that building was not a home run. I spent too much building it. I should have spent about 1.1 million building it, but because I was the general contractor, I worked as my own surveyor at that time. And I did as much of the legwork as I could in-house to be able to make sure I get the building up at a cost that made sense. And then when I landed up finishing the construction, it cost me so much more money than buying these distressed assets that it was hard to lease it up completely. I had some pre-lease tenants that did pretty good. But it took me longer because the rents weren't like $10 a square foot anymore. Now the tenants that I needed in there needed to pay $25 a square foot, more than double, almost 3 times what I was charging in these old distressed assets. And so it took me longer to lease, longer to stabilize, and my profitability, because I have how much money I had into it, was a lot less. So I thought, okay, how do I scale this out and make it worth my time? And the only way to scale it out was to grow. It was to do bigger buildings. And so that's what I did. And that's how I got into developing larger retail centers. And then I started going to 20,000 square feet, then 50,000 square feet. And I hovered around that 50 to 60,000 square feet all the way to the 2008 recession, because I thought that that was where my sweet spot was. In fact, I'd call it my sweet spot. And it wasn't that it was a sweet spot. It was just that it was a sweet spot in my brain. Like that was all my brain could like comprehend. I was like, oh yeah, I'm doing an $8 million project. It's a sweet spot. No, it was bullshit. That was still unsafe. And 2008 proved it to me. 2008 proved to me that it was not a sweet spot. It was actually a hindrance. And the only way to make money was to scale even bigger, but not in retail. It was doors, the quantity of tenants and doors. And that's where I started getting into fourplexes, single family portfolio of assets and rentals. And then when I sold that off in 2016, that's when I really realized that it was in mass stores in excess of 100 units, because I bought an 85 unit apartment complex. But ladies and gentlemen, the whole point behind this was to teach you guys what it takes to actually get a construction loan and get money on my first build. And that's how I did it. I did it through the means of entitlements. It was a pain in the ass. I didn't know what I was doing. And I'm not telling you guys that to discourage you guys. I just didn't have any leadership or direction. It's a lot easier today. What I hated back then is now what I am great at today. And it's really simple to sit down with financial institutions today and actually get construction loans, because I know the game. I know how to entitle property. And so I tell people, you have to learn the game, the banking game. Not the real estate game. The real estate game, if you understand how to evaluate cap rates and values, those two things, evaluate cap rates and values and how they run in parallel with each other and how they complement each other, then you'll understand how to invest in assets. But the biggest thing is understanding finances, banks, financial institutions, how they invest and how they protect themselves. And when you yourself as an investor understand and execute like a bank does, that, my friends, is how you get money, loans, and strategically position yourself to be able to win long term by shaving off and reducing liability and risk on large real estate transactions that you'll take down over the course of time, small and large. But I will tell you guys, these are great projects and a great place to start, but they're not safe long term. There's safety in quantity and in scale. And when you guys realize that, you'll never go small ever again. So if you guys ever hear me say that starting small is a great place to start for learning purposes and learning purposes only, but you gotta scale fast once you learn the game. Don't scale if you can't mentally comprehend it, because you may go out of business. Start small, scale fast. Start small, comprehend, scale fast. Ladies and gentlemen, if you like this content, you want more content just like this, click and subscribe to our YouTube channel, and you'll be notified every time we go live and we release new content just like this. If you like the content, give us some love, smash that thumbs up button, click and subscribe, and always go out and compound your success. Good night, God bless, and thank you for joining our Real Talk on Real Estate.